conference. I want to thank my friend Dr. Laszlo for inviting me here. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've learned researching for my new book, and I hope many of you will read this book and will purchase it. The name of the book is The Real Dr. Anthony Fauci. You can go to Amazon and get it. The subtitle is Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health. And I want to say, as a full disclosure, that I make no money on the book. All the profits, my profits, go directly to Children's Health Defense, where they will fund our litigation, our advocacy, our communications, and all the research that we do. That is, I think, very, very important to our entire community. One of the things that I've learned from researching this book, and by the way, one of the things that you can't do is to buy the book, because I'm getting pre-purchase of the book. We're now over about 10,000. If we can get to 20,000, it goes on the New York Times bestseller list, and it will automatically go on Amazon's bestseller list, which will make Amazon really mad, which is something everybody here should be happy about. One of the things, I've really taken a deep dive into Anthony Fauci and his history. I've looked into his HIV research and the whole history with the ATT and the fraud that was involved there. The children who died in those experiments, nobody doing things, kind of research, a deep dive that nobody has done before. But one of the things that has been most revealing to me has been to be able to trace and track the military and intelligence agency involvement in this entire biosecurity agenda that Tony Fauci and Bill Gates have been the front people for. But it's an agenda. A lot of us look around and they see all of these countries doing the same, imposing the same totalitarian controls in lockstep with each other, and at every level of government. And we wonder to ourselves, how is this possible? How did they all know what to do? One of the aspects of my research that I've been able to uncover that nobody else has really been able to has realized before. Many of us saw Event 201, which was what they called the tabletop simulation of a pandemic that was sponsored by Bill Gates and by some of the intelligence agencies immediately before the pandemic. In fact, in October of 2019, when the coronavirus was already circulating in Wuhan, and you had Bill Gates and all of these top media people and intelligence agency people and from many, many countries coming together in New York and simulating a pandemic. And as it turns out, and they were extraordinarily, it was an extraordinary piece of auguring, of foresight, of prescience. They seemed to be able to uncannily predict all the things that would happen, that it would be a laboratory-generated coronavirus that would begin in China, that would spread across the world. As it turns out, the Event 201 was not a unique event. The military and intelligence apparatus and Bill Gates and NIH and Tony Fauci began doing these simulations, and I've found over 20 of them now. At around the same time, the anthrax attacks occurred in 2001, which was really the beginning of the new biosecurity agenda. Let me give you a little bit of a historic background. I was 7 years old. President Dwight Eisenhower made one of the most important speeches in American history, where he warned the American people about that our country would never be destroyed by a foreign enemy. We were too strong and we were too isolated in the world. And he warned that our democratic institutions would be subverted, our country's soul would be destroyed by the military-industrial complex, which he said was growing too big and would soon overwhelm our democracy. And this was a week before my uncle, John F. Kennedy, took the oath of office. And My uncle spent 3 years fighting the military-industrial complex. He fired Allen Dulles, the top two people, his two deputies at the CIA. He fought with his Pentagon brass for the next 3 years. He refused to send combat troops into Laos. He refused to send them into Vietnam. He refused to invade Cuba. And in the end, he was killed. And then 6 months after his death, Vietnam was an American war. My uncle never sent a combat troop to Vietnam. President Johnson, the brass wanted 250,000. President Johnson ended up sending 500,000, and it became an American war, and the military-industrial complex had won. My uncle ran against President Johnson. My father ran against President Johnson in 1968, running against the Vietnam War, running against the military-industrial complex, and he was killed in that process. 1988, something extraordinary happened. The Soviet Union collapsed, walls came down in Berlin, and we were promised that we would get a peace dividend. And we would no longer have to spend $1 billion on stealth bombers that could not fly in the rain. And all that money was going to go back to America to civilian use, put into schools and hospitals and roads and bridges and railroads. And we were going to build them in education. And we were going to build America into what it was always supposed to be, the shining city on the hill, the examples of the rest of mankind, of what democracy could accomplish. And people from every nation worked together in one nation, the United States, to build a model democracy. Well, that peace dividend, when we heard it, we thought that's going to be wonderful. But when the military-industrial complex heard that phrase, they said, wait a minute, that's going to come out of our pockets. And 5 years later, we had the first attack on the World Trade Center in 1993. And all that money that was headed towards civilian use suddenly stopped. And we began investing money in the new enemy to replace the Cold War. And that was Islamic terrorism. And terrorism had a great allure to the military-industrial complex because it's not a nation. It wouldn't let us down like the Soviets did collapse. It was a tactic, not a country. And it would never go away. And Dick Cheney promised the long war that we would be able to fight in 50 nations around the world. And but Islamic terrorism had its own drawbacks, which was in the United States it was killing fewer people every year than lightning strikes. And it was hard to justify this huge diversion of American wealth, our GDP, toward something that really wasn't threatening people in their homes. But from the beginning, from 2001, when we had the World Trade Center attack, the big attack, the military-industrial complex was already looking at germs and germ warfare and biosecurity as the future of its financial prospects and its power prospects, because germs are so much better than Islamic terrorists because they can get an Islamic terrorist and destroy a couple of buildings, maybe blow up some airliners, but germs can go into every American home and kill their occupants. And so there's a wellspring of fear. There's nothing like germs. And the 3 weeks after the 9/11 attack, we had an anthrax attack that was sent to a number of senators and to people in the press, and it killed a number of Americans. And it was blamed on Saddam Hussein. It was the reason that the newspapers drummed up jingoistic hysteria against Saddam Hussein. He had these biological weapons of mass destruction, and it justified the war that we brought him. He had nothing to do with 9/11. He had nothing to do with anthrax. A year later, the FBI completed its investigation and said that the anthrax that was used in that attack had come from the U.S. military laboratory. So somebody associated with the U.S. Army had, for their own reasons, sent out that anthrax. And by then, we were pumping billions of dollars into biosecurity. Prior to the anthrax attacks, we were spending about $130 million a year on biosecurity. Afterwards, we were spending $6 or $8 billion. And Anthony Fauci struggled to get his part of that. And he ended up getting about $1.6 billion a year from the military, from BARDA, from DARPA, from the Pentagon. And at that point is when he started doing these gain-of-function studies. And the gain-of-function studies are what they call dual-use studies. They're the studies that allow you to pretend that you're developing a vaccine, but you're actually developing a bioweapon. The military was interested in that. We signed a treaty in 1972 that said we can't develop bioweapons anymore, but we can develop vaccines and dual-use technology. The military-industrial complex began funneling huge amounts of money into that, what they call private defense, but it was really about developing weapons technology, of increasing the pathogenesis of wild coronaviruses, flu viruses, and other viruses to make them transmissible, to make them more pathogenic to humans, to make them more virulent and more deadly in humans. And of course, Tony Fauci in 2014, a number of his little bugs escaped from labs, three labs across our country, and 300 prominent scientists in a letter to President Obama saying, don't let Tony Fauci do any more of these experiments. He shut down 21 of those studies, but he began funneling studies through a zoologist grifter who was associated with the U.S. military, Peter Daszak, and Fauci began laundering money through Daszak into the Wuhan lab to develop bugs in that lab. And that was part of the excuse. Tony Fauci has a $6.1 billion civilian budget and $1.6 billion budget that comes from the military. So his total budget is about $7.7 billion. And his military functions are absolutely critical to his power. He's able to give away an extraordinary amount of money every year. He gives away about 13 times what Bill Gates gives away annually. NIH has about 300,000 scientists on its payroll doing experiments, mainly drug development, running clinical trials around the globe. And virtually all the virologists in the world are employed in that effort. And that's why every virologist in the world knew when they saw the genetic sequence of the coronavirus, they knew that it was laboratory generated. And yet none of them spoke out for a year. The orthodoxy of the Omerta held for a year. Why is that? Because all of them are taking money from Tony Fauci. And that's how he exercises control. He can destroy careers, he can make you, he can ruin institutions, whole universities in our country like Harvard, Baylor, Berkeley, Columbia are getting hundreds of millions of dollars a year from Tony Fauci. And if they do the wrong kind of science, there's a faculty member of those universities who say, wait a minute, I want to study the links between vaccines and blood. The deputy Tony Fauci will call the dean of that university and say, if you let that clown do that research, we will bankrupt your university. So he not only dictates what science gets done, he dictates what science does not get done around the world, and he dictates. He's the most powerful medical official in history, and as we've seen now, he has the power to shut down the global economy, to bankrupt businesses, to shut down churches, to suspend our Constitution. As he was accumulating this money and power, the military and Bill Gates and Tony Fauci and the intelligence agencies were practicing these simulations. As I said, they did about 20 of them between 2000 and 2020. And what they would do is each one of them would bring in different groups of people. And they were simulating a global pandemic. They weren't doing any of the things that you would want them to do, which is how do you prepare for a pandemic? How do you build people's immune systems? How do you warehouse and stockpile vitamin D and vitamin C and zinc and the things that people are going to need that are going to make them healthier. How do you train the population to stop drinking sugar drinks? How and to improve their diets and get exercise? How do you develop a communications infrastructure so that when you do get a pandemic, all of the doctors are talking to each other, and the people who are on the front line developing treatments like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, they're able to report those in a way that will get attention for things that actually are working. Allow doctors to treat patients in different ways and communicate with each other through a central repository for that information. How do you develop isolation hospitals, which is traditionally what we used to do with people who are sick? You just put them in an isolation hospital. You don't isolate healthy people. You isolate the sick. You isolate the vulnerable. You don't take an older person who gets sick and put them in a nursing home with a lot of older people who are not sick and kill them all. None of that was discussed. It was never discussed in any of these simulations. How do we preserve constitutional rights in a pandemic? In the United States Constitution, there is no pandemic exception. And by the way, in the American Revolution, the framers of the Constitution knew all about pandemics. During the American Revolution, the armies of New England, George Washington's armies, were sidelined for 3 months because of the smallpox epidemic. So when they wrote the Constitution, they were very much aware that epidemics could have a devastating effect on society, on military, on security, but they didn't make an exception. And these things were never discussed. There was no soul searching about it. Do we need censorship? And social isolation or social distancing, or lockdown, none of that was explored. There was no science on it. It was uncommissioned. The only thing they practiced in all of those pandemic simulations was how do we impose draconian totalitarian legitimacy and collective authority. And each one of them did the exact same thing. They kept drilling what do we do? How do we censor the press? How do we censor the social media? How do we lock people in their homes? How do we shut down businesses? How do we suspend jury trials for the whole population? How do we suspend due process of law? How do we shut down businesses without having to compensate? And they feel again and again that this militarized response to a pandemic was the only preventative response. There was no medical response. It was a weaponized vaccine and militarized totalitarian authoritarian. They did it again and again and again. And each time they had more and more people. So they're doing most of them in top secret. But they were doing the country simultaneously. All the nations of Europe, Canada, Mexico, all around the world were doing the same thing with the top officials. But also, they were drilling, in some cases, tens of thousands of people who participated in local hospitals, local first responders, firefighters, paramedics, police, FBI, CIA, all of these different groups were involved. And what is the effect of that? The effect of it is that all of these people know what their role is when they come. None of them are going to question. None of them are subject to soul searching to say, wait a minute. Are you sure the vaccines work? Are you sure we should be giving and alternative vaccines? going into a indigenous country and shattering social relationships, destroying the economy, demoralizing the people, creating chaos, so that a large number of that population are so frightened that put the entire population in house arrest and you induce in them a psychological state that intelligence agents and psychological warfare experts call Stockholm syndrome, where the people who are locked up and isolated begin to empathize with their captors. They become obedient and compliant. That the only way that they can escape is through absolute obedience. And that is the purpose of these techniques, which is to isolation, etc., which is to induce those states and populations as a whole. The CIA did these experiments, 145 of these different experiments, 145 different colleges, universities in the United States and Canada in the 50s and 60s. And one of the most famous of these, and they were about how do you control populations, how do you control how do you shatter social relationships with independent people with a tradition of freedom, of independence, of irreverence. How do you overcome those things and overcome your conflict and get them to comply with something that is wrong? And one of the famous experiments that took place during the late 1960s is called the Milgram experiment. That experiment, a Yale psychologist called Stanley Milgram recruited about 50 volunteers, and he had those volunteers stand with them with a man who looked like a doctor, a man who looked like a big laboratory. And the volunteer would be instructed to turn about, which he believed was an electric shock to a person in the next room who he couldn't see. He could hear their screams. He could hear their pleadings for mercy for him to stop. And he would be ordered to do it, and despite the screaming, they would do it anyway. And many of the subjects of this experiment were crying. They were begging the doctor to let them stop. And the doctor would tell them, no, you have to keep going. And if the doctor were to do it, 67% of Americans, of every walk of life, doctors, lawyers, college professors, construction workers, 67% of the stable levels of electricity for 150 volts the subject, knowing that it might kill them, and not wanting to do it, doing it because the doctor and a lab ordered it. And what Milgram determined is that authority, that authority will trump conscience in most people. And this is a lesson that the intelligence agencies have learned. If you put somebody up there globally who you call doctor, who's wearing a white lab coat, who has the air of authority, and he tells you to do things, even if he tells you to wear a mask today, over that's at work. Then a week later he tells you to put on a mask. No scientific study site. You'll do what you're told, and then a month after that he tells you now put on 2 masks. You'll do it. And you'll keep putting them on and on as long as that guy keeps telling you. What all of these psychological warfare techniques are designed to do is to overcome the critical thought, overcome any kind of spiritual connection that we have, any kind of analytical mind, and to override democracy, to override our conscience, to override our capacity for critical thought, and get us right. And they drilled it again and again and again. And the first big one of these was called the Bridge to Lockstep. Because the point was to get many, many different government agencies and individuals from the corporate world, the I would say to all of you is by being there today,